Welcome back to another edition of Diamond Star Stories. Today we are going to be covering card number 5 in the set, and this is the Tommy Bridges from the Detroit Tigers. So we'll talk a little bit about Tom, and then I'll show you the card a little bit more in depth. This is pretty exciting that I get to share this again with you. This was added recently in my collection as of November at a card show here locally in Chicago. So Tommy Bridges, full name was actually Thomas Jefferson Davis Bridges, and he was born in 1906 in Gordonsville, Tennessee. He was a right-handed pitcher who pitched his entire career with the Detroit Tigers between 1930 to 1946, only having a break in 1944 when he was in military service in the Army during World War II. During that time, he actually was able to pitch in 4 World Series in 1934, 35, 40, and 45. And the 2 wins they had were in 35 and 45 against the Chicago Cubs in both series. What's interesting about the 45 series is actually he was out all of 44 and most of 45 due to World War II. So he and Hank Greenberg, his teammate, obviously the Tigers throughout those eras, came back to the team for their final weekend series before the end of the regular season. They had already clinched that they were going to be the World Series opponent to face the Chicago Cubs that year. But they were both able to appear in that series and were able to be then eligible to be on the World Series roster. Tommy Bridges didn't start. He was used as a reliever, mostly probably because he hadn't really pitched professionally in almost 2 years by that point. Greenberg did feature in the series, a series in which they beat the Chicago Cubs that year, which ushered in the curse of the Billy Goat in the Chicago lore here. That wasn't broken until they won the World Series in 2016. So Tommy Bridges was probably the best pitcher on that staff for a short period of time, even though the Detroit Tigers of this era had some very good pitchers. He appeared in 6 All-Star games, finished with a career WAR of 50.5. He won 194 games and lost 138. His ERA was 3.57. He had a lot of seasons where it was much lower than that. After he came back, he really didn't have much arm strength left and didn't have a lot of opportunities to be able to stay up with the major league team, and was eventually sent to the minors where he finished out his career in the Pacific Coast League. During his time in the major leagues, he actually led the league in strikeouts twice in the AL and also games started, and he was a 3-time 20-game winner in the 30s, which he won, I believe, 3 straight years of winning 20 games in a row. What's interesting about Tommy Bridges, and this is kind of an interesting little fact that I was able to find out, his very first pitch was against Babe Ruth. So his very first game in 1930, he was able to appear in a game and pitch against Babe Ruth, and he was able to get him to pop up on his first pitch. Later on in his career, he actually surrendered the 700th home run to Babe Ruth on July 13th, 1934. So it's kind of interesting that he's has his personal history of having his first pitch tied to Babe Ruth, but also he was part of Babe Ruth's historic 700th home run, which at that time in baseball history no one had ever done, and stood for many years as a standard that thought was going to be insurmountable until Hank Aaron was able to finally break the 700 barrier and eventually go on to top Babe Ruth's home run record at that point. Bridges was known for his curveball. It was the pitch that people knew was coming, but he was able to hide it so well that he was very effective in pitching with it. In fact, to a point where he actually had the team record for the Detroit Tigers for strikeouts, which was held for a period of a little over a decade until it was broken by one of his teammates, Hal Newhouser. So after his career, he went on to scout for 3 different teams, including the Tigers, as well as the Mets and the Reds. He struggled with alcoholism that started during his career, worsened a bit during the war, and was pretty apparent by the time he came back and pitched after the war. He eventually died of liver cancer in 1968. He was divorced and remarried and did have a daughter during his time in his first marriage. But there's not much more of note that I was able to kind of find of him other than tales of him having a lot of situations and stories in which he was inebriated and kind of found in places passed out and drunk, which was really kind of sad, kind of hearing about the career of Tom Bridges. And we'll never know, obviously, if there was any other sort of mental health component or anything that may have been contributing to it, but definitely someone who really struggled with addiction and at a time where it was really perceived as a willpower issue, and there wasn't a lot of treatment resources to go with it. So let's look at this card. This is card number 5 in the set. I don't know off the top of my head if there is a 35 and 36 release of this card. I should have probably looked that up. This was an older PSA holder and graded out as a 5, and there's a mark on the card, which I believe is this little tiny dot that's up here. A mark at which they may not currently give it the qualifier, but they did at this time. Maybe they're grading it a little bit harder at that point. On the back, we have the blueprint. So this was when I kind of realized that, oh my goodness, there is cards that actually have blueprint that were printed in different years. And actually, as I kind of read through this a little bit more closely, the label itself is wrong. This is actually a 1936 Diamond Star, because you can see that on the back because it has this 1935 stats on here. He was a pitcher of a small stature, so he was kind of only at 5'10", and he was 165 pounds at that point. So not a large pitcher by any stretch of the imagination, but definitely very effective at what he did. And this was coming off the year where he was 21-10 in 1935. So just a beautiful example of this card from obviously maybe becoming my favorite all-time set. I'm enjoying each and every purchase I get here. For me, it doesn't matter if it's a common or a star. I just appreciate the artwork in every single one of these cards. And just how well some of these actually stood up over time, because this one is just, the centering obviously could be a little bit better, but the corners and the edges are just amazing on this card. This is a beautiful example from the set. One of my probably best condition ones to date. So that is it. That is Tommy Bridges. Hope you guys have enjoyed this one, and I'll be back again next month with another Diamond Star Stories, and I'll be back very soon with more content.